Chapter 4, the cell. In these first two sections, we're going to talk about cell theory, major biologists to talk about cell theory, the structure and function, and main types of cells. First off, the history of cell biology. First thing we need to know is what a cell is, and definition of a cell is the smallest unit that can carry out all processes of life. This image is an image of an animal cell. We'll talk about all of the little organelles, these pointing out here eventually, but first, just what the cell is itself. Reminder of the 7 characteristics of life. Organization, so the fact again that it is made up of one cell up to billions of cells. Response to stimuli. Homeostasis, that is keeping stable conditions internally. Metabolism, converting food into energy. Growth and development, growing is growing in size, development maturing into an adult. Reproduction, whether it be asexual or sexual, and this species evolves over time. Main scientists involved in discovering the cell, the first one we're going to talk about is Robert Hooke. In 1665, he was the first to use a light microscope to look at corks and saw cells. The picture over here on the right is what the microscope looked like back then. This is Robert Hooke, and this is what he saw over the microscope. The cells that he was looking at under the cork is just of dead plant cells, and he was able to identify all the different little pieces, that each opening was a cell. Anton von Leeuwenhoek, he said that more than what meets the eye, he saw pond water, microorganisms. He studied this under a light microscope as well. So when he had a sample under the scope, he didn't see anything like this, but clear water and little organisms moving back and forth, back and forth. The next 3, we have Schleiden in the 1838 time, and he discovered that all plants are composed of cells. And piggybacking off of him, almost 100 years later, is Schwann, that all animals are composed of cells, and Virchow, our last scientist, that all cells come from pre-existing cells. So cells don't just miraculously appear, they come from another cell that was already alive. So the cells actually reproduce. The 3 main categories of this cell theory are all organisms are made up of cells, whether that be one cell, hundreds, millions, trillions. Cells are the smallest structural and functional unit of life because they possess all 7 of life's functions. And lastly, they all come from pre-existing cells. All the scientists that we've talked about, their main findings have led to these 3 main ideas of the modern cell theory. Now we're going to get into the basics of each type of cell, what all cells possess, and main types of cells. Huge concept to understand is that form follows function. The shape of the cell reflects the different function of the cell. So this blue image over here is a picture of a nerve cell. This is the main part of the cell, the circle with the dark purple in there, and all the little branches coming off of it is what's allowing your body to send and receive impulses, nerve impulses to, turn your head, bat your eyelashes, breathe, whatever it may be. Skin cells don't have to do something like that. They don't send any sort of electrical or neurological impulse, so they're flat. They almost look like leaves, that bottom picture. They're more for protection, so they can have tons and tons of layers on top of each other if they're flat and skinny. All different shapes have evolved based on the function that cell needs to do, and that's happened over time through evolution. Different species obviously have different cells that they need, and their form follows the function of that cell. Size of cells, most cells are microscopic, 10 to 50 micrometers. That funny looking U is a prefix micro, and that is approximately a 500th, of the size of a period, like a period on your paper that you're to write down right now. Of course, there's always some exceptions. The nerve cell of a giraffe is about 2 meters long, or 6.5 feet, and that's because, of course, the giraffe has an excessively long neck, and those little skinny pieces that we looked at before on the slide have to go all the way to the muscles in different parts of the giraffe. And human egg cells, cells that all of the girls in the classroom have, are about the size of a period. So that just one cell, one egg cell, is about the size of a period, not 1/500th of it like other cells. And if we look at this link, which I will post, but this does show you how the cell is related in size to other objects that you know. So here's a coffee bean times regular font, which is on your paper, a grain of rice. And as I scroll in, we're going to pass different things. A sesame seed, just like on a bagel. The size is given there, 3 times 2 millimeters, so that's its volume. A grain of salt, we're getting smaller and smaller. Amoeba, that's a simple organism, same with the paramecium. There is the human egg, the big blue sphere, which is, again, about the size of 1 period on your paper, which is 130 micrometers. A skin cell, which we saw those pictures of before, the sperm is coming into view. Photoreceptors, those are rods in your eye to look at light. A red blood cell, we all know those are important for carrying oxygen throughout your body. X chromosome, everyone has an X chromosome. Girls have 2 X's, boys have 1. Baker's yeast, so that's yeast to make bread. We have a bacterium, that is this gray piece here with the long skinny flagella coming off of it. Mitochondria and lysosome, those are things inside of a cell, parts inside of the cell that we'll eventually talk to. Then we get some viruses and bacteria, virus, a bacteria, a vesicle is a part of a cell as well. So some single-celled things like a virus are smaller than 1 cell, or the same size as a part of a cell. Viruses, more viruses. A ribosome is inside of a cell. Hemoglobin, that is the stuff that oxygen attaches to on a red blood cell. Antibodies, that helps you get better. tRNA helps when we make DNA. Then we have phospholipid, which we talked about when we talked about biochemistry, and glucose. Adenine, these are bases. Here's an amino acid. So that makes up a protein. This makes up DNA. We have a water molecule. We all know H2O. And then the carbon atom is the smallest thing that we have here. So that's just to show you a little bit of comparison between the cell size and what it's made up of, what's inside of it. Overall, just comparison. It's pretty cool. If you go really fast, so you get dizzy. So I will post the link. And if you look in the top here, it goes through the surface area and the volume, but it is hard to read that graphic there. So let's go back to our slides. There is a limit to the size that the cell can become, and we briefly talked about this. It is due to the surface area to volume ratio. Cells are responsible for bringing in their own nutrients and oxygen that they need and getting rid of waste, generally carbon dioxide. And if these things coming in are coming in too slowly, then they won't be utilized by the cell, and the cell could potentially die. And if the waste is taking too long to get out of, then the cell could it could make itself sick and eventually die as well. And everything is going into and out of the cell through the cell membrane, which we will talk about very shortly. This I just started to say, I totally forgot it was on this slide. The volume, though, the bottom slide here, bottom bullet, the cell's volume increases faster than the surface area. So there won't be enough surface area in order for those things, the oxygen, nutrients, and waste, to move in and out at an appropriate rate. So that's why cells are super small, so that they do have that ideal surface area to volume ratio. Every type of cell is going to have these 3 main parts. The first is the plasma membrane, or the cell membrane. We're going to call it both things. I generally call it the cell membrane, and this is the barrier and the border of the cell. This is made up of phospholipids, and there are proteins embedded in it. In this diagram here, these are all the phospholipids, the circles with the little 2 tails over. I'll zoom in over here. The purple things are proteins, and they allow things to go in and out. This has a couple different jobs. It protects the cell. It separates the cell from the rest of external environment, which might be another cell, or to the outside air. It is like the border patrol, so it allows for things to come in and out. Selectively permeable means it only allows certain things in and out, and it allows for interaction between cells. Cells can actually communicate with one another, and the membrane is important in that communication. Second thing that every single cell is going to have is genetic material, or DNA. We've talked about this earlier on in the year, that the DNA is the hereditary or genetic blueprint for making an organism. Same exact thing in the cell, for making the cell and for making the reproducing and generating new cells. In the two categories of cells that we'll eventually get to, eukaryotic cells, the DNA is found inside the nucleus protected, and we are eukaryotic individuals, so all of our cells have that inside of the nucleus, whereas prokaryotic organisms, there is no nucleus and they're just chilling in the cytoplasm. And our third thing is the cytoplasm, which is pretty much the area that houses everything of the cell. So in this diagram, the pinkish is the cytoplasm, and it's a jelly-like fluid that everything else sits inside of. So all these organelles, the centrioles, the ER, the ribosomes, nucleolus, everything is just hanging out inside of it, and it gives it its shape and its structure. Two main types of cells are prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Prokaryotic are more basic. Prokaryotic means in Latin before the nucleus, so there is no nucleus. And this picture over here to the right is of a prokaryotic cell, like a bacteria. It shows similarities to early life forms, relatively small, and they are simple. There's no nucleus. The DNA is just like this purple string here, not protected inside of a nucleus like a core. It's just, again, hanging out. And there is generally extra protection of a prokaryotic cell in addition to the cell membrane. If you look here, this orangey color brown, the cell wall, that protects the membrane as well. Eukaryotic, these are more developed cells, which we have, or a true nucleus. There is a nucleus. They're generally larger. This bottom one is an animal cell, which is prokaryotic. We have the nucleus here, this pinkish golf ball. There is, again, the membrane outside of the cell, and there are organelles, all these other funny looking shapes inside of the cell that have different jobs, to make different things, to carry different things, to get rid of waste, to eat things, whatever it may be, but they each have a specific job. Unlike prokaryotic cells, they generally don't have any sort of highly evolved organelles. Organelles we're going to get onto in the next section, so hang tight.